Hi, welcome to Chapter 2, National Differences in Political Economy. Okay, so political system is just a type of system governments use to run a nation. So they come in all varying shapes and sizes and flavors, from the most free, which would be democratic, to the most controlled, which would be totalitarianism. Okay, so the emphasis is on collectivism as opposed to individualism as far as how these governments are organized. So collectivism, what is that? Um, that's a system that's going to stress the collective, um, looking at the goals of the many over the goals of the individuals. And I guess the origin of this philosophy can be traced back to ancient times, um, and I guess communists and socialists believe in a more collective type of society where they emphasize the needs of society over the individual freedoms. The biggest problem I can see with collectivism, even though it sounds like a great idea and it's something we would all like, yeah, let's share and let's work together to a better society. I guess the root fact is that man is a very selfish animal, and working for their own individual goals or needs, or working to better themselves or improve their financial positions, is what motivates people a lot stronger of motivation than the motivation to collectively help each other. So this is why a lot of these communistic and socialism types of governments have not have had as much success as they had hoped for in the past. So socialism can be traced back to Karl Marx, and they advocate that the government or the state have the ownership of the commanding heights of the economy, which means production, distribution, and exchange. Ownership of utilities, of the transportation system, of manufacturing, and the state will manage these enterprises to the benefit of the society. So the state, not corporations, will manage these large functions of the economy because the state feels that they can do a better job and a fairer job for society than individual companies. The problem is there's so many decisions that need to be made and such a complexity that trying to control every aspect of one nation's economy through governmental branches and personnel generally is a setup for failure. Typically, government personnel are not efficient at running the commanding heights of a country. But this is the general idea of the socialism, is that let the government be the organizer and distributor of the wealth and labor, and that will create a fairer society. So in the 20th century, we had this idea split into two main groups. We had communism, um, where collectivism could be achieved through revolution and a dictatorship, and we had the social democrats, which worked through the same goals, but only by using democratic means to form a socialist society, not a revolution. Because of what I explained before, many state-owned enterprises fail to succeed, and today many nations are privatizing a majority of their commanding heights of their economy. And this started way back with Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, where she started to deregulate and privatize British government control over certain industries, and soon followed by Ronald Reagan in the United States, greater privatization, because the feeling was that corporations would have a much better um, time, much more successful go at running these individual companies than the government trying to run everything, which is a daunting and huge task. So the individualism suggests that let the individuals have the freedom over their economic and political pursuits. So let the individuals decide what's the best job for them, if they want to own and run a company, how much education they want to do or trade they want to go into, what political party they want to pursue. And of course, this can get traced back all the way to Aristotle and private ownership, is more desirable. So the individualism, definitely is built on individual freedom and self-expression, letting people pursue their own self-interests, because the idea is that you'll be more motivated to pursue what you're interested in and to achieve your goals rather than working for society. And democratic systems would run within a free market environment where the market would run itself. You could kind of look at this if you've ever been in a team-based assignment in the MBA program. You may have noticed that sometimes you would prefer to work alone than working in a team, because many members in the team don't put in the full effort that they would if it was an individual assignment, and some of them become a free rider where they're hoping that the other members of the team will pick up the slack and do most of the work. So that's sort of the difference of working by yourself or working in a team. Connects some of this individualism idea about working for yourself as an individual or working as a collective to better society. Now, in a dictatorship, a totalitarian type of regime, there is a type of repression of political, religion. There is no freedom or fair elections. The media is censored. Basic civil liberties are denied. Nobody is allowed to challenge the regime. The current dictator the game is basically, we're going to control everything and make sure that we can stay in power and we can get better control of the economy and the political process, so we can dominate and keep all the money for ourselves, and we'll use any means necessary to repress the public, to force our will on them. See Egypt before their revolution, where you had a classic dictatorship that really repressed the country for 40 plus years. Now, typically, because it's run through fear and people feel stifled, these economies never perform well, because you don't have a check and balance. It's sort of like when you have one person with total control, a collective process doesn't develop, which usually results into better decisions. Say, for example, I'll use an example in the movie world. If you saw the first 3 Star Wars films, you may have noticed that the first 2 Star Wars films were really good. The third, Return of the Jedi, not so good. And then the follow-up prequels, even worse. What changed in this process? Well, in this process, in the original Star Wars, and to some extent in the second Star Wars, it was more a collective process where George Lucas was working with others in the movie studio to produce these films, and had a lot of checks and balances, a lot of additional input that George had to work with, which made the first 2 films a lot better. Moving on from that point, George had complete control over these films, and especially the last 3 prequels, which were universally viewed as a disappointment. And part of it was there was no one there to tell him, no, George, this is a bad idea. Jar Jar Binks is not a good idea. Or, there was no movie studio. He was completely financing himself. There was no one in his organization that would really tell him otherwise. So he pretty much, any idea he fancied, he went with no additional discussion. And that's sort of like a dictatorship. And they don't really generate the best products. If you look at, say, the American government recently, there's been a lot of delay or problems in getting things done because of this separation of power, and the political process allows a lot of voices to be heard and a lot of different opinions to be looked at and challenged. So it's a much slower process, which can be frustrating, but generally results in better decisions in the long run because it's more of a collective decision making. So the dictatorships tend to be too isolated, and you surround yourself by too many yes men, then you never really know what's a good choice, what's a bad choice. Everybody's telling you every choice you make is great, so it usually runs into a bad situation. So we have this 4 different types of these types of dictatorships. One could be the communist, totalitarianism, which there aren't too many of these left. North Korea certainly would be the best example, of this type of situation. The theocratic, where the political party is monopolized by one party group or individual that governs according to religious principles. You could think of Iran as a good example of this. The tribal totalitarianism, a political party that represents the interests of a particular tribe that also monopolizes power. And lastly, a right wing, where the economic freedom is allowed, but political freedom is restricted in the belief that it could lead to communism. So I guess there aren't too many examples of this today, but in the past, Nazi Germany would be a good example of this type of government. Okay. So in the world, you see a lot of change recently with the Arab Spring of the people revolting, and the people are sick of living under a dictator and trying to free themselves to get more of individual freedoms and more of a democratic process. So this is sort of where the world's been heading over the past 50 years, as more and more countries have moved away from the communist or total socialistic environments and moving more towards a capitalistic or democratic environment. Okay, so if we look at economic systems, it should be clear from the previous discussions that political ideologies and economic systems are connected. In countries where individual goals are given the utmost levels of importance over collective goals, we're more likely to find more market-based economic systems. In contrast, countries where collective goals are given a precedence, the state may have taken control over the many of the country's enterprises and markets, and such countries are likely to restrict freedoms for their populations. So so we have the free market system, and we have the state-owned enterprises. I guess would be two types of economies, where you would have either a command economy or a mixed economy. So let's talk about a market economy. So a market economy, or a pure market economy, all production or productive activities are privately owned, as opposed to being owned by the state. The goods and services that a country produces are not planned by anyone. Production is determined by interaction of supply and demand, and is signaled to producers through the pricing system. So if demand for a product exceeds supplies, prices will rise, signaling producers to produce more. If supply exceeds demand, prices will fall, signaling producers to produce less. So this is a sort of invisible hand in this market economy, that as consumers are demanding certain products or certain preferences, industry is trying to deliver those in order to make a profit. So the government really doesn't have to make any decisions. All the businesses in the economy collectively are making all the decisions to decide what's the best utilization of resources. Okay. Now, a command economy, the government is going to try and plan all the goods and services the economy produces. In the past, economies that have tried this have failed miserably. And you'll see lots of stories where they go to the supermarket and there'll be 50,000 bars of soap, but no eggs or milk. Or there'll be wintertime and there'll be 500 pairs of flip-flops, but no boots, because someone in the government messed up, or production was not. There was an error somewhere along the way. Now, in a market economy, this error will be quickly corrected by a smaller, more nimble company seeing an opening, an opportunity, moving in to fill it quickly. The governments don't move that fast. And in command economy, the governments control all the quantities that are produced and the prices at which they're sold at. So if greater demand picks up an item, the prices won't increase, and instead of what will most likely happen is we'll run out of supply. When this is a disappointing thing for consumers when you go to the store and there's nothing there. In many cases, you would gladly pay a little bit extra just to make sure you could procure your item. So the objective of the command economy is for the government to allocate resources for the good of society. In addition, in a pure command economy, all businesses are state-owned, with the idea being that the government can direct them and make their investments that are in the best interest of the nation rather than the interest of a few private shareholders. So in the past, communist countries that tried to do these command economies failed miserably at really running an efficient economy. Other economies that weren't communist also dabbled in some command aspects of their economies. While the objective of these command economies is to mobilize the resources for the greater good of the society, the opposite always seems to occur. In a command economy, state-owned enterprises have little incentive to control costs or be efficient, because they cannot go out of business, so there's really no threat or problem for failure. So you can see how these command economies typically were not the best for optimizing and creating efficiencies that would lead to a better economy. So in a market economy, manufacturers could control costs, make investments to reduce costs, produce the best product at the lowest price for consumers, and remain competitive. If there is no competitive structure, the government's running everything, then why bother innovating or making something better? Okay, so let's look at a mixed economy next. All right. Okay, so a mixed economy is something between a market economy and a command economy. So they're taking elements of both. So the government is going to control some aspects of the economy, and private ownership will control other aspects of the economy. Now, the number of mixed economies in the world have greatly declined. Now, mixed economies were once very common in the world, probably the majority of economies. But in the 80s, Great Britain, France, Sweden, they were all mixed economies, but had, been going on to a process of privatization to reduce the state ownership of businesses in all of these three nations. And a similar trend occurred in countries moving into the 90s, such as Brazil, India, and Italy, which were once state-owned enterprises, have been moving to privatize and nationalize these enterprises. As the current European financial crisis has been occurring, a lot of the European members, the EU members, have been looking to sell off and nationalize government-owned businesses to raise money and reduce the burden of government by having to run these industries. A lot of times when the government are running these companies, if a company is doing bad and should really go out of business or bankrupt, it saves it and keeps it running in an inefficient way. Where a pure market economy, when businesses when they're not good, they just go bankrupt, and new businesses, better, stronger, more profitable businesses take their place, keeping the economy a lot more dynamic and a lot more resilient. Okay. Now let's look at legal systems. A legal system is going to refer to the laws of the land. How does the government regulate behavior, business, the process of laws they can use to enforce once grievances or contracts are developed. So this is important, especially for foreign direct investments, because a legal system is going to help regulate and refine business practices. It's going to help define the manner in which business transactions are to be executed, generally contracts, and the rights and obligations of business owners and customers. There are different legal systems. We have the three most common would be one, common law. And the common law system evolved in England over hundreds of years. It's found in most of the former British colonies, including the United States. And it's based on tradition and precedents and custom. And tradition refers to a legal history. So precedent would refer to a case that had occurred sometime in the past that's already judged and solved the problem that could be applied to future or current situations. So the law is an evolutionary interpretation of the law regards to its characteristics. So the law develops and is flexible and changes with time as new situations occur. There's also a civil law system, which is based on a set of laws organized into a civil code, and the courts interpret the civil code. Most countries, at least 80 countries in the world, Germany, France, Japan, Russia, operate a civil system. Now, a civil law system tends to be less adversarial than a common law system. But the judges rely upon detailed legal codes rather than interpreting tradition or precedent or custom. The third legal system that we're going to talk about is the theocratic legal system, one which is based on religious teaching, such as Islamic law. The most widely practiced theocratic legal system in modern world, although the usage of Hindu and Jewish law persists into the 19th century, Islamic law is primarily a moral rather than a commercial law and is intended to govern all aspects of life. And it's the foundation of Islamic law is the Holy Book of Islam, or the Quran, which outlines this law. So Islamic law, in some countries that are more religious based, they may use this as the law of the land, which in some cases isn't always very conducive to business, especially banking. In banking under Islamic law, you're not allowed to charge interest, which could be problematic to some of the world's modern banks. Okay. All right. So how do common law and civil law differ? The two systems approach contract law in different ways. So a contract is an agreement between two people where they're going to come to terms, or an arrangement that's going to be put down, and usually in paper, is going to outline the obligations of both parties. In the common law state, contracts are very detailed with all the contingencies spelled out quite explicitly. In the civil law state, contracts are shorter and much less specific. Now, the civil law, the contract, why are they shorter and less specific? Well, the reason is because many issues have already been covered in the civil code and don't need to be reiterated in a contract. So it can be very adversarial in the common law system. But common law systems have an advantage of greater flexibility, and allow for judges to interpret the contract disputes in light of the prevailing situation. So a little bit more flexibility. Let's switch over to property rights. And the property rights are, basically will give you ownership over some sort of resource, some sort of property that can specifically be named yours, such as a deed to a house, a title to a car, or the rights to a business. So in a legal sense, the term property refers to a resource over which an individual or business holds legal title, a resource that by and large you can own. So resources can include land, buildings, equipment, capital, mining rights, businesses, and intellectual property. Intellectual property are ideas that can be protected by patents, copyrights, or trademarks. All right. So property rights can refer to the legal rights over the use of which a resource is put in, and over the extent to which their legal system defines the protection of these property rights. Now, private action refers to the theft of property, which could be called piracy, blackmail, which could be done by, I guess, either individuals or groups. In a public action is to violate property rights occurs when public officials such as politicians or government bureaucrats extort income, resources, or the property itself from property holders. So a public action could be, a government official swindling you out of your property rights, where a private action is more of an individual taking action against your individual property. So this is a cornerstone to many economies, is that you can't have an economy unless you can prove you own a piece of property. If you own a piece of property, then you have the right to sell it, and you have the right to borrow money against it, and it is essential for reorganization and redistribution of capital that property rights are made pretty explicit. Now, corruption is present in all aspects of our lives. Now, in order to encourage foreign direct investment, companies prefer to deal with countries with lower corruption. So if there's high amount of corruption, you're generally going to have a slowdown in international trade and economic growth. So countries where bribes and corruption are allowed to flourish through inaction of the government or through insufficient penalties, corruption will spread and grow and discourage international business from occurring in the local domestic economy. So corruption is a bad thing. You could see here corruption index where New Zealand is the least corrupt. New Zealand, Finland, Japan, United Kingdom, United States are the top 5 least corrupt business environments, where Somalia, Venezuela, Congo, Russia are considered more corrupt and therefore attract less foreign business or direct investment due to this corruption. Okay, United States passed a law in the 70s called the Foreign Corruption Policies or Practices Act. So basically prevents U.S. companies from acting inappropriately or contributing to corruption. So U.S. companies had bribed government officials in foreign countries in an attempt to win lucrative contracts. So the United States government passed a law saying that is illegal for any member or employee of the United States business to bribe a foreign government official or to obtain maintain any type of business contacts or business practices where a foreign official had authority, and that it required all public trading companies to keep detailed records that would reveal a violation if the act had occurred. So it's an effort for American companies to not contribute to foreign corruption. And in some economies, the only way to get things done, to get through the red tape, is to grease the palms or grease the wheels with some bribes. And, so American businesses were sort of at a disadvantage in many countries because they were not allowed to participate in corruption, which may make American businesses less competitive, but overall, hopefully making the countries a little bit less corrupt. Now, intellectual property is a key area where theft of ideas and likenesses can be easily pirated. So patents on how to build or any type of device, copyrights on music, literature, characters, and trademarks of product names, Prada, Lexus, top product names. These are all things that companies own, but other other more criminalistic activities may want to steal, may want to download illegally music or movies and sell them um, in their foreign economy and not pay royalty to the original artists or companies that own them. So this is a big problem, especially for the United States. It produces a lot of intellectual property, produces a lot of TV shows, movies, songs, books, magazines that get continuously ripped off by people who ignore their property rights. Um, so a patent is something granted to an investor who develops a new product so that they have the exclusive rights to manufacture and sell this product. Copyrights, of course, refer to the legal rights of authors, composers, playwrights, and artists. And trademarks are based on designs and names and officially registered with the companies that utilize them. So, in many parts of the world, Louis Vuitton handbags are knockoffs are created. Also, watches, piracy of much of software, watches, even pharmaceuticals are counterfeited. Now, how would you like it if the medicine you purchased was made by a company claiming to be, say, Johnson and Johnson's or Merck, but completely different company who are counterfeiting and selling these medications? And many times, medications don't have the potency or even the correct ingredients. Okay. So the protection of individual property rights is going to differ greatly between countries. The Paris Convention for the Protection of Individual Property was signed by 170 countries to protect these individual property rights. Trade-related aspects of intellectual property, TRIPS, requires WTO members to grant and enforce patents lasting at least 20 years and copyrights lasting at least 50 years. So, piracy of music is rampant across the world. The International Federation of Phonographic Industry claims that about 1/3 of all recorded music products sold worldwide are pirated. And I'm sure many people in this class have downloaded music illegally. And that's just an example of how easy it is. We all know how easy it is, but throughout the majority of the world, it's even worse. And the record companies and artists that produce this music have really completely changed the industry as their sales have plummeted greatly over the past 15 years. So, so piracy costs this music industry probably close to $5 billion annually. Computer software industry suffers a great deal as well from lax enforcement of intellectual property rights and violations of intellectual property costs. Software firms, $59 billion a year. I mean, have you ever got a copy of Windows Office that was not a copy you purchased? Or a computer game? Or I know that companies have made significant progress currently preventing piracy, but it still is occurring, and it's still costing these companies that make these, develop these products, huge amounts of money. According to Business Software Alliance, the software industry in 2010, some 42% of all software applications used in the world were pirated. Almost half of all installed software is pirated. Probably more closer to half today. The worst region, Central and Eastern Europe, where piracy rate is about 65%. The worst country was China, where piracy in 2010 ran at 78%. The cost the industry more than $7.8 billion in lost sales, up from $440 million in 1995. So piracy in the United States is as low as 20%. But still, the value of sales loss is significant based on the size of the U.S. market. Is close to $10 billion today in lost sales. So you could see how, look at all this money that these companies are losing. The end result is that the people who actually do buy the software wind up paying a higher price because they have to cover for all the piracy, the money lost to piracy over in other countries. Now, product safety and standards. As far as you know, when products are made, um, there's a certain level of safety that they have to adhere to, and there's product liability that involves holding a firm responsible in case their product injures or causes death or damage. There was a case not too long ago that affected many Americans where pet food that were manufactured in China contained melamine, which was to make the pet food look like it had a higher level of protein, but really it was a poison, and it made a lot of animals sick in this country, including my own cat got very sick on a product that was Chinese-based pet food that had melamine in it. And a lot of dogs had died because of this. Not too much later, there was a company in China that was producing formula for babies that had this melamine in it because of its ability to make the product look like it had a high protein level. And this product never really left China, but many Chinese babies were stricken, or sick, or even death based on these products. So you could see the need for individuals to be protected from corporate greed, and a system set up legally where consumers can sue and get back damages, and penalties can be held against companies that make products that are bad for people. So there has to be payment of monetary damages. Criminal liabilities could also be a punishment in addition to fines and, of course, imprisonment. So both civil and criminal liability laws, which are more extensive in the United States than most other countries, although many Western nations also have a comprehensive liability laws. Liability laws are typically less extensive in less developed nations. Many businesses will argue that the high cost of liability insurance make American businesses less competitive in the global marketplace, but it's a way of preventing very unscrupulous and greedy companies from producing products that are going to harm individual people, such as toys that have lead paint on them. That is, even today continues to happen. So there has to be consequences for companies that are not going to take the precautions they need to take to make their products safe. While the ethical thing ethical thing to do is undoubtedly to adhere to a country's safety standards, but businesses should take every precaution possible to make their products as safe as possible, especially when they're going to be part of international trade. You want to make sure that you don't damage the reputation of the country in general. In the past, I was an accounting manager for a vitamin company, and we sold our vitamins, were very popular overseas, and people paid huge amounts of money, maybe close to $100 for a bottle of multivitamins, just because they knew it was manufactured in the United States in a very highly regulated environment as far as consumer safety and product specifications. They trusted the vitamins made in the United States over domestically made vitamins and would pay a premium for it because they knew that the United States had such extensive safety laws when it came to the manufacturing of these vitamins. So sometimes it could work in the betterment, make the product more attractive internationally if the country has a reputation for high safety standards, such as the United States, and also high quality. So in many countries, they look for the Made in USA label because they know that the government is going to enforce and maintain a high level of safety and quality for the products that other local economies may not have. Okay. As far as managers in this global economy, you're going to have to, for international business, you're going to have to think about the political systems of other countries, the economic systems of other countries, and the legal systems before getting involved in foreign direct investment, extension of your businesses into these foreign countries, or the sale of your products into these foreign countries. You're going to have to study the political, economic, and legal system of where you're exporting your product to. And the importance of any ethical issues of your international trade. For example, I remember a case study of a company that made gummy bears, and they were selling gummy bears in the Middle East, but they had neglected to realize or inform the customers in the Middle East that there was a pork product used to create the gelatin that the gummy bears were made out of. So who would think that gummy bears would contain pork? But this company got in big trouble because they're exporting gummy bears that contain a pork derivative that was against many religions of the area. So internet, the more educated you are, the more well versed you are on international trade, the less conflicts or problems your company will have moving into an international area. That's why certain international managers who speak multiple languages, are familiar with the law, the economics, and political systems in many different countries, are often very high paid corporate individuals, because they can prevent a lot of problems from occurring that could be bad for domestic companies, and also help greatly expand the international export and trade of a company's products.